The stars burned cold and indifferent, as they always did. But to the crew of the Veiled Har, the darkness of space now felt heavier, more oppressive. The ship was a sleek vessel of advanced design, a symbol of the Galactic Concorde's vast reach and superior technology. Commander Jellic paced across the polished floor of the observation deck, eyes locked on the view of the blue planet below. Earth. They had found it by accident. An anomaly in the communications net. A curious signal, faint but unmistakable. A primitive world, so they believed. It should have been an easy mission. "Commander, we're in orbit," said Lieutenant Asha, her voice calm yet tight with tension. She stood by the communications panel, fingers hovering over the controls. "Waiting for your orders." Jellic took a deep breath and nodded. "Initiate contact. Send the first greeting." The words felt strange on his tongue, almost too formal for what should have been a simple exchange. But the Concorde had never been this far into the galaxy before. Earth was a wild card. A few moments passed in silence before the console beeped. A burst of static interrupted the communication channel, followed by a series of garbled symbols. Jellic frowned. "This isn't their language. It's distorted." "Wait," Asha said, narrowing her eyes. "There's something else. I'm decoding it now." The transmission cleared. A crude image flickered on the screen. The face of a humanoid, but with jagged scars and wild, unkempt hair. His eyes gleamed with a manic gleam, like a creature more at home in a scrapyard than any orderly civilization. The figure's lips curled into a grin. "Hey, shiny head." The voice crackled through the speakers, harsh and guttural. "We see you. You look like a big, fancy, flying trash can. What's your deal? You lost or just looking for a scrap?" The crew froze. Jellic's mind raced. This was not what they had expected. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could issue a command, the figure's face vanished, replaced by a blur of motion. The communication screen flickered violently, then cut to static. "Contact lost," Asha reported, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Something's scrambling our signal." Jellic's heart skipped. The Veiled Har wasn't the only ship in the galaxy. Earth was in the heart of an established zone, where the Concorde's presence was absolute. The crew had expected a simple exchange, not an immediate attack. But as he gazed at the blue marble of Earth below, something shifted in the air. A pulse, a vibration that hummed through the deck. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the ship's communication channels. Then, without warning, a loud, thunderous crash reverberated across the hull. Jellic was thrown forward, slamming into the control panel. The lights flickered as alarms blared throughout the ship. He struggled to his feet, vision swimming, but there was no mistaking it. The Veiled Har had been hit. "Shields up. Now," he barked, heart pounding. The attack had come from nowhere. A sudden assault. From below, Earth's space goblins were already making their move. The Veiled Har rocked violently as another blast rattled the hull. Commander Jellic's vision blurred, but his instincts kicked in. His body moved before his mind could catch up, scrambling to the central command platform. He gripped the console, fingers flying over controls, trying to stabilize the ship. "Damage report," Jellic shouted, his voice low and strained as he steadied himself. "Shields at 30%, Commander," Lieutenant Asha responded, her voice tight. "Hull integrity is holding, but we've been breached. Boarding pods are deploying." The air felt thick, charged with tension. Jellic's mind raced. How had the Goblins, whoever they were, managed this so quickly? The Veiled Har had been designed to withstand far more than this. Yet, here they were, surrounded by chaos in a vast emptiness of space. "Prepare for countermeasures," Jellic ordered, then turned to Asha. "Contact them again. Demand a ceasefire." Asha nodded, her face pale, but her hand steady. She rerouted the signal, broadcasting a direct communication to the enemy ship. The screen flickered before another face appeared. It was a goblin, like the one they had seen earlier. grinning wildly, covered in scars and metallic implants, as if he had been pieced together from parts salvaged from a dozen different bodies. His eyes gleamed with a madness Shellick had never seen before. "Hey there, fancy ship." The Goblin's voice crackled, distorted with static. "Big, shiny space vet. How's the weather up there? I gotta say, you folks really know how to make a mess." He cackled, the sound grating. Shellick's patience thinned. He leaned forward, trying to remain calm despite the rising fury in his chest. "This is Commander Shellick of the Galactic Concord. We demand you cease your attack immediately. You are trespassing on Concord-controlled space, and your actions will be met with full force." The Goblin didn't flinch. If anything, the grin widened, stretching to an almost unnatural length. "Aw, come on now. What's the fun in that?" The Goblin's voice dropped into a mock somber tone. "You folks are all stiff and shiny, not like us. We don't need all that fancy talk. You can't even fix your own ships without us giving you a hand, huh? Speaking of which, we got your tech, and it's working real good." Shellick's jaw clenched. "You're going to regret this," he growled, his hands tightening into fists. "Do not test the full might of the Concord." The Goblin chuckled darkly. "Regret? Nah, I think you'll be the ones regretting trying to tell us what to do, shiny head. You can keep talking all you want, but we're gonna keep taking. We're gonna take everything. And if you don't want it to be your ship, you better pack it up quick." He paused for a moment, as if savoring the tension in the air. Then his grin grew even wider, if possible. "So, are you gonna make this fun, or are we just gonna scrap your ship like the last ones?" Before Shellick could respond, the transmission was abruptly cut off. The screen blinked to black. The ship shuddered again as another blast shook them to the core. "Prepare for boarding," Shellick ordered grimly. "We're not backing down. Not now." The Goblins, it seemed, were playing for keeps, and they didn't care if they were facing a superior force. They were here for one thing only: chaos. The Valjar floated in the cold vacuum of space, its once pristine hull now marred with scorches and deep dents. The Goblins had struck with terrifying speed. The Concord had sent only a small fleet to respond, a fleet that had just been torn apart. Shellick stood at the command center, staring at the view outside. The shattered remains of a Concord destroyer drifted by, its engines spewing sparks. In the distance, the Goblin ships loomed, twisted masses of metal held together by stolen technology and sheer chaos. They had no elegant design, no finesse, but they were fast, and they were brutal. "Commander," Asha said from behind him, her voice tense, "our communications are still jammed. We've lost contact with the fleet. There's no way to get reinforcements in time." Shellick turned, his face hard. "Then we're on our own. Prepare for another assault." He strode to the holographic table, where a map of the surrounding area blinked with red alerts. The Goblins were everywhere, cutting through the debris field with reckless abandon. "They won't stop," Asha added, her eyes darkening. "They're too unpredictable, too wild." Shellick clenched his jaw. He hated to admit it, but she was right. The Goblins weren't just attackers. They were a force of nature, and they had no respect for order, no understanding of the rules that governed the galaxy. The Concord's military might had been useless against their erratic tactics. Without warning, the ship rocked again, a deep, bone-rattling thud reverberating through the walls. Red lights flashed, and the ship's systems screamed in alarm. "Boarders," Asha shouted, slamming her hand against the control panel. "They're coming in fast." Shellick's heart raced. "Activate internal defenses. Seal off the lower levels." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was already too late. A loud explosion ripped through the hull, and the floor beneath their feet buckled. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed from the corridors. "All hands to battle stations," Shellick barked. "Prepare for hand-to-hand combat." The Goblins were on them, and they were relentless. With savage efficiency, they stormed through the ship, their wild whoops and laughter echoing in the narrow corridors. They didn't care about the Concorde's advanced weaponry. They didn't need to. They carried scrap rifles, scavenged explosives, and their own brand of brutal innovation. They were chaos incarnate. Asha fired the ship's railguns, sending explosive rounds tearing through the air. But the goblins were already too close. One leaped onto the command platform, a wild-eyed creature covered in metal plates and wires. He grinned manically, raising a jagged blade above his head. Shellick barely had time to react. With a roar, he tackled the goblin to the floor, his hands locked around its throat. The creature struggled, kicking and thrashing, but Shellick's grip was unyielding. With a final, brutal twist, he ended it. But the battle was far from over. The goblins were everywhere, relentless in their pursuit of destruction. "We've underestimated them," Shellick muttered to himself, breathing heavily. His mind raced. He had thought they could contain the situation, force the goblins into retreat. But now, with their ship overwhelmed, he realized the truth. The Concorde might have the technology, the fleets, the might of 1,000 worlds behind it. But the goblins, they didn't care. And that made them more dangerous than anything Shellick had ever faced. The stars seemed to shrink as the Valjar limped through the vast emptiness of space. The damage was severe. Hull breaches had been patched, but the ship's systems were barely holding together. What had started as a routine diplomatic mission had become a nightmare. And it wasn't over yet. Commander Shellick stood before the tactical display, his face grim as he surveyed the scattered wreckage of the fleet. Concorde ships, once mighty and imposing, now drifted like forgotten carcasses, their lights dimmed, their weapons silent. In the distance, the goblins' chaotic armada continued to rage, orbiting Earth like a swarm of predatory insects. Asha stepped up beside him, her expression hard. "The fleet's gone, Commander. The reinforcements we requested never made it. It's over." Shellick's eyes narrowed. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His mind was already working, formulating plans, but the truth was undeniable. The Concorde had been blindsided by the goblins. They had expected an easy victory, a minor disruption, nothing more. But now, Earth's space goblins had thrown a wrench into their carefully laid plans. He turned away from the display, his voice low. "We need to send a message. The Galactic Concorde needs to understand what's happening here." Ash's face softened with understanding. She knew what he was about to say. "You're not thinking of using the last of our communication channels to declare war, are you?" Shellick's gaze hardened. "It's the only way. If we don't act now, Earth will be lost to the goblins. And this time, they won't stop here. They'll spread their chaos across the galaxy." He moved to the comms station, his fingers hovering over the controls. The decision was heavy, but it was the only choice. Earth wasn't just a backwater planet. If the goblins succeeded here, they would have the means to cripple the Concorde's very core. "Initiating transmission," Asha said, her voice steady. Shellick nodded, his hand shaking only slightly as he pressed the final button. The transmission opened, a direct channel to the Galactic Concorde. His face appeared on every screen in the galaxy, his uniform still bearing the marks of the battle. "This is Commander Shellick of the Valjar," he began, his voice carrying through the vastness of space, calm but resolute. "To the Galactic Concorde, Earth is no longer under our control. We are at war with an enemy unlike any we have faced. The goblins of Earth have overwhelmed us. Their savage tactics and unpredictability have shattered our forces." He paused, his breath steadying as the weight of his words settled in. "They have taken our fleets, they have ravaged our ships, and now they threaten the very heart of the Concorde itself. Make no mistake, the goblins are a force of destruction. They will not stop until they have stripped the galaxy of all that it holds dear." Shellick's voice grew more intense. "I am declaring full-scale war on the goblins. We must bring the fight to them, or we risk everything we have built." He held the transmission for a moment longer, locking eyes with the camera as if daring anyone to question his words. "Send reinforcements," he finished, his voice a low growl, "or Earth will be lost. And so will we." With that, the transmission cut off. Jellic exhaled slowly, his hand still gripping the edge of the comms panel. It was done. The war had begun. Asha placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression one of quiet support. "We'll make them pay for this, Commander." Jellic didn't respond. His thoughts were already elsewhere, focused on the next move, the next battle. The war was just beginning, and they had no choice but to fight. The silence of space was deafening, broken only by the hum of the Valjar's remaining systems. Commander Jellic stood at the bridge, staring at the chaotic mess of debris swirling outside the viewports. The once pristine field was now littered with shattered ships, the wreckage of Concord forces and Goblins scrap alike. Their brief skirmish had spiraled into a full-scale war. "Commander," Ash's voice broke through his thoughts, tense and urgent. She stood near the control panel, fingers racing across the screens. "We've received a response. Reinforcements are on the way." Jellic's shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. The news was a flicker of hope amidst the overwhelming odds, but he knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Goblins were relentless. He had learned that much in the last few hours. But with the Concord's reinforcements inbound, they could mount a defense, push back the savage invaders. "What's the ETA?" he asked, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. 10 hours, maybe less. The first fleet should be arriving soon." Ash's eyes flicked nervously to the screens. "But that's if the Goblins don't strike first." Jellic's gaze turned hard, his fingers clenched into fists. He had no intention of waiting idly for the enemy to come crashing down. The Goblins had already shown they could fight in ways the Concord wasn't prepared for, and he wouldn't let them have the upper hand again. "Prepare the remaining fighters," he ordered, his tone sharp. "We're not waiting for them to come to us." Asha looked up, her expression both startled and impressed. "You want to counterattack?" Jellic's lips curled into a thin smile. "Yes, but we do it on our terms. We'll hit them before they can regroup." With a series of quick commands, the crew moved into action. Asha worked the controls, dispatching what was left of their fighter fleet, a handful of small, fast ships with just enough firepower to make a dent in the Goblins' chaos-driven assault. Jellic's plan was simple: hit hard, hit fast, and disrupt their momentum. The Concord would not be known for backing down. Moments later, the fighter bay doors opened, and the tiny ships shot out into the void like angry wasps. Jellic watched them disappear into the darkness, each vessel leaving behind a streak of light as they accelerated toward their targets. The Valjar crept in behind them, a shadow in the midst of the battlefield, avoiding the worst of the Goblin forces while positioning itself for the strike. Jellic's mind raced through the tactics. The Goblins had their numbers, but the Concord had precision, training, and tactics. The fight was far from over. "Captain," Asha called out, her voice tight, "we've got a Goblin ship in pursuit. They're launching interceptors." Jellic didn't flinch. "Let them come. We'll give them a taste of what happens when they mess with the wrong people." The first Goblin ship exploded into view, its silhouette jagged and chaotic, just like the Goblins themselves. It launched a volley of missiles, their trails of light streaking toward the Valjar. But Jellic was ready. With a swift command, the ship's shields flared to life, absorbing the impact of the blasts. "We're not backing down. Not this time," he muttered under his breath. The Valjar surged forward, and the battle resumed. The stakes higher than ever. This was no longer just a skirmish. It was a fight for survival. And Jellic intended to make sure the Goblins learned it the hard way. The Valjar shuddered under the strain of combat, its shields flickering as another round of Goblin fire struck. Jellic's hands gripped the edge of the command chair, his knuckles white, as the ship lurched from the impact. The crew had pushed hard, striking fast, but the Goblins fought like wild animals, relentless in their desire to destroy. Outside the ship, the battle raged on. Concord fighters darted in and out of the fray, unleashing devastating firepower as they picked off smaller Goblin vessels. Yet, for every Goblin ship destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The chaotic swarm of enemy ships seemed endless, their movements erratic and unpredictable, making them difficult to target. Shields at 20%. Ash's voice broke through the chaos, sharp with urgency. She was working furiously at the control panel, her eyes flicking between screens as she desperately tried to keep the ship intact. Hull integrity is weakening. If we take another hit like that, we'll lose the engines. Shellick's mind raced. He had known from the start that this wouldn't be easy. The Goblins were madmen, but they were also a force of nature. The Concord's well-oiled machine was facing something far more primal, something that didn't play by the rules, and it was starting to show. Reinforcements are minutes away, Asha added, almost as if reading his thoughts. But if we don't hold out, we will hold out. Jellic cut her off, his voice hard and steady. Get the secondary cannons online. We'll make them regret this. His order was met with a flurry of activity. The Valjar was already outnumbered and outgunned, but Shellick wasn't one to give up without a fight. He could feel the weight of command pressing on him, every decision vital, every second counting. A blast rocked the ship again, and this time it sent a shockwave through the bridge, knocking Jellic off balance. He stumbled, his hand grabbing the edge of a console to steady himself. The lights flickered, casting the room in a strobe-like pattern. But Jellic didn't flinch. On the tactical display, a large Goblin ship loomed. It was bigger than the others, jagged, patched together with scavenged parts, its hull covered in strange symbols and graffiti. Its weapons were charging, and Jellic knew they were about to unleash a devastating blow. Brace for impact, he shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. The ship groaned as the blast hit, shaking the crew to their core. The bridge's screens flickered, and the entire ship seemed to tremble under the force of the impact. Jellic's vision blurred as his body was pressed against the restraints. The lights went out. For a moment, there was only silence. And then, the sounds of the battle returned, louder, more chaotic than ever. Jellic blinked, the world slowly coming back into focus. Asha was already at her post, working furiously, her face lit by the glow of the control panels. We've lost power to the main weapons, she reported, her voice calm despite the situation. The Goblins are targeting our engines. Jellic's mind flashed back to their earlier declaration of war. The Goblins had made it clear they weren't just here to win. They were here to break the Concord. But they had underestimated one thing: humanity. Jellic's jaw set. The Goblins thought they could tear the galaxy apart with their madness. But they hadn't faced humanity's will to survive. We're not done yet, Jellic muttered, a fire burning in his chest. Prepare for a counterstrike. And this time, we hit them where it hurts. The Valjar groaned under the strain as Jellic stood at the bridge, watching the chaos unfold. Every screen was filled with flickering alerts, red lights flashing across the tactical display. The battle had reached its peak. The Goblins were relentless, but so were the Concord forces. The reinforcements had finally arrived, a fleet of powerful warships cutting through the dark void like a storm. But the Goblins weren't backing down. Their ships had no elegance, no precise coordination, but their fury was unmatched. The tiny Galactic fleet had held its ground, causing destruction that would have crippled any other force. Now, the tide was turning. But Jellic knew that even with reinforcements, the battle wasn't won yet. Commander, Ash's voice was tight as she leaned over the console, her fingers dancing across the controls. We're facing a massive push from their flagship. If we don't take it down, the entire fleet will follow. Jellic's eyes narrowed. The Goblin flagship was larger than anything they'd faced before. It wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of their brutal, chaotic reign over Earth. The ship was an amalgamation of stolen technology, its hull pocked with strange spikes, and irregular weapons, but it was still a formidable force. "We need to strike now," Jellic said, his voice low, a steely resolve settling over him. "All fighters, prepare for a direct assault on the flagship. We need to take out its engines before they can reach us." "Understood," Asher responded, already giving the order. The crew sprang into action, their movements sharp and efficient despite the exhaustion etched on their faces. Jellic could see it too, the weariness, the toll the battle had taken on everyone. But there was no time for rest. Not yet. The fighters launched in waves, their engines flaring as they streaked toward the massive goblin vessel. Jellic's hand gripped the edge of his chair, his eyes locked on the flagship. The first wave of fighters engaged, dodging blasts and returning fire. But the goblins fought like cornered animals, their cannons tearing into the small ships with brutal accuracy. "Brace for impact." Ash's voice cut through the comms as the ship was rocked by another blast. Jellic gritted his teeth. "Hold steady. The reinforcements will be here in minutes." A powerful rumble shook the Veil's Har, and the lights flickered. Jellic looked to Asha. "Status. Shields are down to 5%. We can't take another hit like that." Her voice was tight, but she wasn't panicking. She never did. "Then we hit them first." Jellic turned to the tactical display, the plan forming in his mind. "Prepare all remaining heavy weapons. We're going to take down that flagship now." The Valjar lurched forward, charging directly at the flagship. The ship's engines screamed to life, and the crew braced as the final push began. Jellic felt the weight of the command in every fiber of his being. This wasn't just a battle. It was a war for survival. If they didn't win here, if they didn't crush the Goblin flagship, Earth would fall. "Firing." Asha called, her voice steady despite the stakes. The Valjar's massive cannons erupted in a blinding flash, the rounds striking the Goblin flagship with devastating force. The flagship rocked, its shields flickering under the barrage. But the Goblins were not finished. The flagship returned fire, a torrent of deadly plasma blasting toward the Valjar. The ship's hull groaned, and Jellic felt the tremor through the deck. "Keep firing. Keep pushing," Jellic shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of the battle. The final push was in motion. It was now or never. The Goblins were cornered, their flagship weakening under the intense assault. Jellic knew that this was the moment that would decide everything. One final blow, and the chaos would be over. Or it would be the end of them all. The Valjar shook violently as another blast from the Goblin flagship struck its hull. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the lights flickered again, casting the bridge in an eerie half-light. Jellic could hear the muffled sounds of the crew scrambling behind him, their footsteps heavy with the weight of the battle. His heart pounded in his chest, but his gaze remained fixed on the tactical display. This was it, the final moment. The flagship was listing, its shields barely holding as the Valjar continued its relentless assault. Every shot fired from their remaining cannons seemed to chip away at the giant vessel, but the Goblins weren't done yet. Their flagship was a beast, and it fought with a savage fury that matched the madness of its crew. "Shields at 2%. Ash's voice rang out, strained, her fingers flying over the console. "We got one more shot before the systems go down completely." Jellic's jaw tightened. They couldn't afford to wait. The Goblins would overwhelm them if they didn't finish this now. "We're not waiting," he said, his voice cold with determination. He stood tall, the weight of command heavier than ever before. "All weapons, full power to forward batteries. Take down that flagship." The crew moved in unison, a final surge of energy flooding the bridge. The remaining fighters had engaged the Goblin interceptors in a vicious dogfight above, but it was the Valjar that had to deliver the killing blow. Jellic had known from the start. This battle would be won by the ship that could outlast the chaos. Outside, the battle raged on, explosions lighting up the darkness. But the Goblin flagship remained a hulking mass of violence, its cannons charging for one final, desperate strike. Ash's voice was steady despite the chaos. Firing, Commander. The Valjar shuddered once more as its primary cannons came to life, firing directly at the flagship's exposed flank. Jellic's eyes locked on the tactical display, watching as the blast hit. The flagship's shields flickered and sputtered, a ripple of energy passing through its hull. For a moment, it seemed as though the ship would hold, but then, with a final, resounding crash, the shields collapsed. The flagship groaned, its structure beginning to split apart as fires erupted along its hull. Jellic could see it in his mind, the chaos unfolding in slow motion. The Goblins had underestimated the Concord and the resilience of humanity. The Valjar wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of everything they had fought for. The Goblin flagship let out a final defiant roar of gunfire as its engines flared, but it was too late. Another blast from the Valjar ripped through its core, and the massive ship began to break apart in a series of violent explosions. The shockwave sent debris tumbling through the void, but the flagship was done. A wave of relief washed over Jellic, though it was quickly tempered by the reality of the destruction around them. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The Goblins were retreating, their fleet in disarray as the remnants of the flagship crumbled into space. "Status?" Jellic asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Asha didn't need to speak. She only nodded, her eyes meeting his. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. The Valjar had lost so much, and Earth had suffered in ways no one could truly comprehend yet, but the fight had been worth it. The bridge was silent for a moment, the crew exchanging exhausted glances. The universe was still dark, still dangerous, but for the first time in hours, it felt like the storm was finally passing. Jellic exhaled slowly. "We've earned this moment. Now, we rebuild." As the Valjar drifted through the wreckage of the battlefield, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. The fight wasn't over, but Earth had survived. Humanity had survived.